Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I'd like to go over some really basic deck building stats, and to do that we're going to look at some phony, fabricated, quote-unquote decks, and just go over some really basic things that I think are pretty intuitive, but the sort of extent to which these principles play out is probably surprising to most. It was certainly surprising to me. To start with, we'll look at a single attribute deck. And basically the scenario is that we want 50% of our cards to be flying, for example, and our expectation might be that 50% of our cards throughout the game will be flying. And so looking out to turn 5, for example, we'll have seen 12 cards. We're expecting 6 of them to be flying, and perhaps our strategy hinges on 6 of them being flying, I don't know. And so we lay out our deck like that. So we have 30 flyers and 30 not flyers. But if we look at the analysis, the first perhaps surprising thing for some of us is just how infrequently we actually hit that mark. It's not bad, 62%. You're still looking at about almost 2/3 of your games. You're going to have that 50% flyer mark by turn 5, and yet still there's a third of your games where you don't. So one thing to be cautious of is that just because you have a certain proportion of cards in your deck doesn't mean that you're going to see that throughout the game. There's going to be a lot of variability, and so even just for a single attribute, I found it very useful to have my decks loaded in here and to kind of show me what that distribution really looks like, what those odds really look like. The story gets even trickier when we get up to 2 attributes. So in this scenario, we're looking at 2 attributes, again looking out to turn 5, and again our expectation being that the proportion of cards we have in the deck is going to match the proportion of cards we actually see. So in this case, we've got a third of our cards being flying, a third being trample, and so by turn 5 we're expecting a third and a third of each respectively. And so we lay out our cards like that. We've got flyers, we've got tramplers, 20 of each, and then 20 others. But if we look at the analysis, we see something pretty remarkable. We still hit about 62% on each individual attribute. So we've got a 62% chance of success getting our 4 out of our 4 flyers by turn 5, and the same with trample. But our chances of perfection drop all the way down to 32%. It gets cut in half by having these 2 attributes with no overlapping cards. 3 attributes, it's even worse. Let's take a look. So 3 by turn 5 of each, and we divvy up the deck accordingly. But when we look at the analysis, again, upwards of 62% of hitting each individual stat, but our chance of hitting all of them plummets to 15%. So this is the first thing to really bear in mind. As you add things that you depend on, the chance of hitting all of those things is going to drop. And this is sort of an artificial situation. I mean, you wouldn't normally plan or hope to be hitting these kind of numbers with this makeup, but still, this chance of hitting all 3, no matter what these numbers are, is going to plummet if you have no overlap between them. So let's actually look at what happens when we start overlapping cards. To do that, let's first look back at the 2 attribute deck. You'll see we were at 32% here for the total perfection, 62% on each attribute. When we add an overlapping group, that is to say, when we basically chop our deck into 4 instead of 3, and we make one of those 4 groups double attribute cards. So if we've got cards that have flying and trample or whatever the 2 attributes are, the numbers change drastically. Not only does our chance of perfection go up, but you see it reflected even in the single attribute odds. Look at this, 94+% of hitting each individual attribute, and that contributes to those combined together and give you a 90% chance of hitting both your flying and your trample goals. And to me, that is a remarkable change. I mean, just adding that one group that sits in the middle, so a quarter of your deck, with 2 attributes, the 2 attributes you need, whatever it might be, adds an enormous amount of stability right off the bat. The effect on the 3 attribute cards, I mean, this is getting closer to the reality of what your decks might look like, because you're dealing with like groups of 8, so you might have 4 of 2 different particular cards in each category, and then some fillers like some lands or whatever. The effect is still really significant. Remember, this was at 15%, and now we're up to 83% chance of hitting all 3 of those attributes, and each individual attribute is up to almost 94%. So this is pretty intuitive stuff, but really the extent of the leaps from having no overlap to having some amount of overlap in the way that you structure your decks is just enormous. So I really encourage you all to put your decks into the MTG Deck Analyzer. Tell us what your findings are in the comments, because I think some of these things will be pretty shocking, just how big of a difference adding a little bit of overlap can be, or how big of a difference trying to add another sort of success factor into your deck can be. So please share what you've got. Share your decks in the public shared space here if you could. And yeah, thanks for watching. Give this a like, subscribe, leave a comment. Thank you.